Green Text on 4chan says, Vivek Ramaswamy is literally an IPO scammer. They say acquires Alzheimer's drug called Axavant for $5 million in 2014. Drug had already failed phase 2 trials in 2010. Vivek's own mother, Geetha Ramaswamy, conducts new phase 2 trial in 2015, which is conveniently successful. $350 million IPO in 2015, where Vivek cashes out. Stock plummets 75% by September 2017 after phase 3 trial failure. After more trial failures, 99% loss in value and company name change. So, Trump has been accused of sort of playing fast and loose with ethics in the market. And often what we've been able to say is, well, that kind of makes sense. Like, it's not too unethical what he did there. Or he's already settled out of court for the people that he hurt. He's done some iffy stuff in the past, but nothing too extreme. This, I think, would actually be a scam. This is quite different. This is bigger. Now, chat, press 1 if you are frankly shocked at the notion of an Indian scamming someone. But I think it's interesting to look into this. Now, Vivek, for all that we could discern about him from before today, he's clearly very intelligent, very on the ball, has good, at least stated good politics. And I've quite liked him. I thought that he deserved a high position. But with his advocacy for this position now, and assuming that this is true, or even something like it is true, it does spin a potentially different narrative that this political thing is just part of his broader scam. Now, I don't know if that's true. The fact that he is an Indian immigrant, I think, would potentially bias his politics on this particular issue, even though he's right on everything else. But the overriding message I'd like to say here is that don't put this guy on the hiring board. We've all been a little cautious about Vivek for a long time, not sure we could entirely trust him. Maybe that was a little bit of racial bias, but maybe it turns out that correlated with the truth, or perhaps there was a causal link. But let's just be careful. Now, for years, Trump and the entire MAGA movement has been about deporting those migrants that shouldn't be here and making it about American workers first. I think suddenly pivoting to American workers first, just behind a trillion Indians, I don't think that's going to happen. Now, we'll look later at the thing that Trump retweeted on his Truth Social. I don't think it indicates what you think it does. And J.D. Vance, at the same time this big debate on Twitter was happening, was sort of at the side arguing against it. Anyone that's blackpilled about the entire MAGA movement as a result of this is again sort of stuck in the present and probably very prone to blackpilling anyway. It is disappointing. I agree. But we've had many disappointments over the years, from our own side and from the other side. This is another one that we must weather and get through to find something better on the other side. I don't think the entire MAGA movement is in favor of this. It's not that you have the entire top half that wants 1 trillion Indians and then the people that want 0. No. You have a small portion of those at the top, those that have clawed their way up, perhaps never talking about this issue, who want this, mostly those who are currently financially benefiting from it. But I don't think most of even the upper crust of the MAGA movement wants this. I don't think Trump wants it. I don't think JD wants it. And probably about 90% of Trump supporters, maybe more than that, don't want a lot of Indian immigrants. In fact, I saw earlier that there's a poll that 60% of the US in total think that there are already too many H-1B visa immigrants. That's quite a specific question for 60% to say emphatically, yes, there are too many. But as I've mentioned before, the people generally are on our side for these issues. The people generally don't want immigration. And with enough time, with enough opportunity, that push can eventually have an effect. But there's a lot of bumps on the road to get there. If it turns out through this that the MAGA movement ends up shedding some of those who were unworthy of it, then so be it. And even if Trump disappoints us, we have at least determined that that was the case, determined that we couldn't trust him or couldn't trust whoever else falls through this. There was no way around that. We just have to go through. People who think that well, if there's anything disappointing about these guys, then we should just give up. There are people that seem to have that attitude, even if they wouldn't word it that way. You're not just giving up on the ugly, inevitably failing path of trying to trust someone. You're giving up on the entire experience of civilization, the entire goal. You would sooner see a collapse than to do the difficult work of trying to filter for those who are capable. Boris Johnson over here. Turned out he wasn't as good as we thought, but how were we to discover that? Many people already suspected it, and that was fair, but we didn't know until he demonstrated it. He won with a massive landslide, huge voting support, but he proved not to be worthy. What we gain from that is an understanding that he wasn't. You may think, we don't have time to mess about with that kind of thing. I know. And that's a real concern, that we may not have time. But there's no way around but through, I think, with these things. And if it turns out that we have to discover the unworthiness of some of these people by going through, then so be it. The US has a bit more time, I think, than the UK. So we do still have time to figure this stuff out, and there's no way around it. I'm not reading all of it. I'll read some of it. Vivek says, the reason top tech companies often hire foreign-born and first-generation engineers over Native Americans isn't because of an innate American IQ deficit. A lazy and wrong explanation, he says. A key part of it comes down to the C word, culture. Tough questions demand tough answers, and if we're really serious about fixing the problem, we have to confront the truth. He says, our American culture has venerated mediocrity over excellence for way too long. He says, that doesn't start in college, it starts young. I'm not sure about that, Vivek. I think what may be happening there is that you're having a high IQ blind moment. I would like you to give me an example of a culture that does not do that. India, no, they're much worse. China, no, the country where about 75% at least of their population are, well, not of their population, but of their regions are just peasant wastes. No, not China. Japan, you say? Yeah, actually, they're not too bad right now. You know, they've got a lot of problems too, but for this particular matter, yeah, they're pretty good for that. So the issue that you're pointing out would be only one of corruption, of a degradation, of a subversion, of the Yuri Bezmenov term, demoralization, which is actively fought against by actions like getting Trump elected. That will fix it. So why are you acting as if the current paradigm is necessarily true and not the result of manipulation? You are smarter than this. He then says, a culture that celebrates the prom queen over the math Olympiad champ or the jock over the valedictorian, it will not produce the best engineers. Thing is, Vivek, that IQ, as you are deftly demonstrating, is not the only important factor. Actually, as far as the norm for humanity goes, social ability and wisdom, which is very similar to common sense, are actually much more useful for most people. Those with a high IQ are risky because whilst common sense and gut instinct and sort of standard neural net kind of reasoning is not the thing that's going to push humanity to the next frontier, it is very stable. It's what evolution has selected that keeps civilization just ticking along stably. Even though it doesn't look like it sometimes, even though it looks really wonky sometimes to someone who's overly analytical, it is actually completely normal and stable. Your high IQ people, yes, they can push humanity to the next frontier, or they can get millions upon millions killed. Rationality, logic, high IQ forms of reasoning is risky. When it's done well, it's a small improvement, sometimes a pretty large improvement. A few people in history, maybe 10 to 15 people in history, have made large improvements that can be largely attributed to just them. But when it's done wrong, it's much worse. And maybe roughly the same number of people, or maybe a few more than that, can be attributed with the deaths of millions, and in a few cases, tens of millions, through acts which I put to you were the result of bad rationality rather than bad common sense or gut instinct. Lysenkoism could not have come from a mind operating on the basis of common sense and gut instinct. It could only have come from a mind operating from an analytical, abstracting sort of pattern. Wrongly, using bad factors, but still. As you here are demonstrating, Vivek, being high IQ is no guarantee of being correct on any issue, or furthermore, and more importantly here, useful for society. That's why the maths genius or the academic achiever are not held up proudly compared to the socialites. Because the socialites are more likely to just keep society running as normal. Now, add on to that, because I'm nowhere near done, add on to that, why does bullying exist, Vivek? Why do some people get rough treatment by those around them? Is it because their behavior is being disincentivized? Yes, partly. But there's a more subtle and much more useful reason for bullying, and that is called tempering. You heard of tempering, Vivek? Were you ever bullied for being smart, Vivek? I'm guessing that when you were bullied, you just gave up because your ideas weren't really good enough to justify continuing with them, or you didn't have the kind of character that had the confidence to maintain it even in that rain of arrows. No, you didn't give up, you kept going. But some people who think they're smart do give up because they're not. Because their ideas do suck. And they would have been dangerous if they had not been bullied out of them. Bullying nerds makes them prove themselves to society. It causes them to self-temper, to make themselves even more useful. You gotta look further than the surface, Vivek. You're definitely smart enough to do that. Why aren't you doing it? Prioritizing and amplifying and glorifying your average socialite. And it doesn't help them in the long term. It just makes them feel good in the short term. But they don't need the help in the long term. They're already roughly where they need to be to fit in and to coast along in life just fine, usually. But the people who really matter, the people where society focuses its energy, because that's what bullying takes, where it focuses the heat of tempering, are the people who have the potential to be great and who need a reason to be above and beyond what they currently are. Those with intelligent potential are usually bullied because it makes them sharper. And the degree to which you are unwilling to delve beneath the surface here is very disappointing, Vivek. Unfortunately, I've seen opinions of this level of caliber from your average socialist, quote-unquote, utilitarian, a word for someone who is actually the same kind of moral thinker as literally everyone else, but just isn't willing to admit that they can't think past a one-step relationship between two things. He continues, a culture that venerates Corey from Boy Meets World, don't know, or Zack and Slater over Screech in Saved by the Bell, don't know either, or Stefan or over Steve Urkel in Family Matters, don't know either, will not produce the best engineers, he said, except, yes it will, because it does. He says, fact, I know multiple sets of immigrant parents in the 90s who actively limited how much their kids could watch those TV shows precisely because they promoted mediocrity and their kids went on to become wildly successful STEM graduates. Which of course, you know, Vivek, you know perfectly well that anecdotal data like this doesn't mean a whole lot when you're talking about an entire nation. You know that. You're just saying this is sort of just a relatable anecdote. Wait, you preceded it with the word fact. Well, it's a fact that you know them, I'm sure, I don't doubt that. But the point you're trying to make with this quote-unquote fact is not as factual as you think it is, Vivek. Also, doubt intensifies a distinct possibility. If you knew them, that means your parents knew their parents. And because you have a high IQ, which I will graciously credit you with, Vivek, though it is clearly misused, your parents probably had high IQs as well, which means your parents' friends probably had high IQs as well, which means your parents' friends' children probably had high IQs as well. And your parents were brown, so they probably had friends that were brown. All I'm saying, Vivek, is that there is a certain degree of convergence which defies the inference you're making from this data, this anecdotal data. That said, TV in its current form is not always the most beneficial thing. However, very importantly, to a large extent, not completely, but to a large extent, whatever a kid finds meaningful, they are likely to get something from. Even if it's just an understanding of what not to do. Generally speaking, and I have not been a parent myself, but this is my read from the outside looking in for parenting. When fostering a child, you want to find not the thing that is your image of the most productive citizen, which a lot of parents do. You want to not be too heavy-handed or too light-handed with your guidance. What you want to find is what they inherently find meaningful, what they are drawn towards, and you want to try and mold that experience into a useful one for them, which is, of course, quite difficult. But the point being that if they are spending all their time watching TV, the answer is not turn that shit off, just completely rejecting it. The answer is, well, what do they like about it? Maybe I can optimize whatever they enjoy about it to be useful. Sometimes it's bullshit. I have heard from other people who have experienced it that the channel Cocomelon, I think it's the YouTube one for kids, it's just sort of like bright, flashy colors and pictures, and it's not really meaningful. That's tricking the human sense for pursuing meaningfulness. That is actually a concern. And if that's what he's talking about, fair enough. But if we're talking about the 90s, things were not quite that degenerated yet. And I suspect Vivek, that what happened there is that they were prevented from watching media which was harmless, maybe even useful, would teach them life lessons, maybe teach them some common sense, which everyone else benefited from, but they didn't because they were too smart for it, ended up becoming doctors with no common sense, or they got it from something else. Or like you, Vivek, all the intellect, all the analytical capacity, all the social intelligence, but not as much common sense as the prom queen or the jock who watched the badass 90s cartoons. He goes on, he says, more movies like Whiplash, fewer reruns of Friends, more maths tutoring, fewer sleepovers, more weekend science competitions, fewer Saturday morning cartoons, more books, less TV, more creating, less chilling, more extracurriculars, less hanging out at the mall. So that would be okay. There are a lot of kids who would do well in that environment. However, your perspective here is, again, remarkably shallow. You are treating people as economic units. I'll tell you what people aren't. They are not robots. And they are also not just messy, nonsensical idiots who need our guidance, who need to be redeemed by the arts and wisdom of the academic establishment and of humans ascending past our messy, disgusting natural origins. Both of those perspectives are wrong. There's elements of both which can be included in life, but you need to find the hybrid balance between the two. And the hybrid balance between the two is to recognize that natural way, that mess of our evolutionary history, is where all of the stability of our society comes from. It's and the mess, the strange things humans do, the sometimes inexplicable, seemingly useless things that we do almost every time. If you give it some thought, Vivek, which you are very capable of, those are the things that keep a society adaptable. When you're designing a evolution-like system, say you're designing a system with a colony of evolving life forms in a very simple environment, which mimics evolution, but obviously way simpler. If you allow those creatures to evolve to the perfect form to fit their environment. They all get to 100% the perfect form, maybe a crab, usually a crab. They all get to their perfect adapted form for that environment. Brilliant. They're thriving. The civilization, the population next door, well, they're not perfect. They're kind of a bit all over the place, a bit messy. There's some fuzziness there. And then the environment changes. And population 1 dies. Oh, but Uzalu is just a simulation. Evolution is scattered with the corpses of creatures that were too well adapted to a specific niche. Humans are weird and messy because that is the best strategy for survival. Yes, even today. Arguably even more so today than it has ever been in the past. So, what you're doing here, Vivek, is you're turning your child into a scalpel in order to eat a large steak dinner. Scalpel can do that, but there are much better tools for it, and if they want to be a steak knife, not a scalpel, if that's their destiny, if that's what they're drawn towards, then don't push them into the medical field. Let them be a chef. Managed to elegantly mix my metaphors there. I think it worked in the end. So this is not wrong. It's just that you seem to be presenting it as if it's the only solution, as if friends and sleepovers and all this fun stuff are just maladies to be avoided, just temptations that corrupt people and make them worse. Even if there was some truth to that, you've got to look at the reverse causality there. People that are drawn towards these intellectual activities are going to have a higher IQ because that's what they're interested in. The people that watch Friends and have sleepovers, oh, they're idiots. Is it because of the media? No, it's because they're normal people with normal IQs who like normal things like Friends and sleepovers and cartoons. There's very few people in society who are even capable of doing the highly intellectual things on that list, especially to the highly charged degree that you're talking about. Now, you may look over at the East and see that it's more common over there, particularly in Japan, for them to hyper-focus on these intellectual ventures in their families. They've got the reputation of the Asian kid who didn't become a doctor, who got beaten by his parents because he got an A- instead of an A* or whatever it's called. And yet, they're not the dominant civilization on Earth, are they? What are they? Why not? What have they lost? Why aren't they on Mars right now? Why aren't they colonizing the outer reaches of the solar system? They have such a better, more advanced culture. Well, I can't give you an exact answer to that, Vivek, but I can certainly ask the question and then allow your high IQ intellect to process it. Maybe it's not as simple as you think. Maybe humans are, shock, horror, disbelief, actually quite complicated. I know. Literally, the most complex system in the universe, I put it to you. But Vivek's figured it out. Nah, he's got it. Job done, day one. This is the kind of reasoning that you expect from your average teenager socialist utilitarian, who again call themselves utilitarians because they are too lazy to think more than one step from cause towards other effects. The side effects of what we see in daily life are sometimes way more important than the direct effects. Very disappointing. Let's continue. Chat, I feel like my speciality is bad intellectuals. What do you reckon? We continue. He says, most normal American parents look skeptically at, quote, those kinds of parents. More normal American kids view such those kinds of kids with scorn. If you grow up aspiring to normalcy, normalcy is what you will achieve. Again, everything I've just said sort of applies again here, so I'll move on. He says, now close your eyes and visualize which families you knew in the 90s or even now who raised their kids according to one model versus the other. Be brutally honest. Don't know, don't remember. However, once again, quite importantly here, the reverse causality, the people who can do the intellectual stuff already had the higher IQ, so were likely to achieve well in society. By the way, what I said earlier about high IQ not being the only important thing, scores of people will have, if thousands were listening, say scores of them would have started sending me links to, but actually IQ is the best predictor of lifetime success, best predictor. Look at all these studies, all this data, way better than any other predictor. Yeah, because it's so easy to measure. Best predictor of lifetime success. Reread what you just said. It doesn't mean it's the factor that is the best correlate or the best cause of lifetime success. It's just the best predictor. Height is pretty good as well. Nowhere near as good as IQ, but it's not bad. But wisdom and conscientiousness and social ability and possibly a few other things are really hard to measure. But I guarantee if we could measure them, they would be better predictors than IQ. Height and IQ correlated? Probably a bit, yeah. Says the highest person in the server, Odar. Well, except for Dai. Let's continue. He says, normalcy doesn't cut it in a hyper-competitive global market for technical talent. Elon, the world is not Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is, you'll be shocked to hear, quite a small part of the world, actually. Do you know what happens in most of it? People make food and clothes. People make hardware and products of all kinds. People move stock about warehouses. People help people to find the product they're looking for. All this stuff that people do that's just normal, that keeps society stable, that keeps it going. If everyone was like you, Elon, we would not survive. Elon, sorry, Vivek, but this really the same thing applies to both of them. They're both here because of autism. Let's be honest with that. We would not survive with only people like you. Why do you think it's normal? That people like this, do you know that evolution is real, Vivek? I assume that you accept that it exists. Even those of you in chat that are even very religious. I think most of you have sort of grasped the concept that evolution is true. If you've accepted evolution is true, then why the hell would you rail so hard against normality without even thinking, wait, why is it normal though? Because it's effective for keeping a society alive. Your job, Vivek, is to go out into the wilderness where you're capable of going, intellectually or physically, whatever it ends up being, whatever the wilderness is of the day, and colonize it, capture it, advance society, who's sitting quite comfortably behind you, doing normal things. They'll thank you if you win. They'll thank you if you achieve something. They won't thank you if you just look smart as a kid. And that is how the most successful societies in human history operate. I'm not saying that we're at a perfect point now. As you'll notice, I do a politics show where I criticize the state of our societies quite a lot. But the basic premise of our societies, the basic premise of our evolutionary history is sound. He says if we pretend like it does, we'll have to we'll have our asses handed to us by China. I think, okay, Motch is saying that this sentence here was where he's essentially saying normal people aren't good enough for the highly competitive tech environment. That it wouldn't make sense for him to be saying that. I think what he's saying is if our nation just pursues normality, or he's saying normalcy, then we can't compete in the global market for technical talent. I think both interpretations are plausible, but I think I interpreted it correctly. Now, the narrative that China is a genuine threat to the West, yes, indeed, Motch, is far-fetched. The only way that China is going to be a threat to the West is if the West continues to let it be. There is talent in China. I mean, there's billions of them. Of course there's talent in China. But even still, with how many of them there are, I would give good odds that there's much less of it in China than in the West. The US alone has about 350 million people and China has 2 billion. And I would put it to you that there's maybe 3 or 4 times the actual innovation potential and tech expertise in the US than there is in China. Even now, even at the bottom end of hopefully the rock bottom of where the corruption of our societies goes. Corruption, which, by the way, I strongly suspect is being driven ultimately by China for exactly this outcome. if our society was just full of Viveks, the MAGA movement probably wouldn't have happened, probably couldn't have happened. Because it didn't start from intellectuals. The problems in our society started from intellectuals. Intellectuals are supposed to protect the rest of us, but they failed. You could even argue they betrayed us, many of them. It started from the ground floor, the MAGA movement. Of course, Trump was the scion of it, but who do you think was supporting him? JDF says at this point, China is more of a danger to itself. Yeah. I mean, the Three Gorges Dam could collapse pretty much any day and then wipe out China as a nation. It's that bad as well. Odar says Neil deGrasse Tyson exists as he does because he was not bullied enough. Maybe so. Kuman says all China can do is steal IP and make shitty knockoffs. That is most of what they do, but that's not all they do. There is talent in China, no doubt, but not as much by proportion as in the West. And most of the talent that's in China would not be there if not for the West being extremely generous to China, and I think largely because of kickbacks. Spooner says the attempt to over-engineer and centralize society and do away with normalcy has been the problem in the first place, Vivek. Exactly. All socialist regimes started with some grand rationalized design to change what is normal, like this. If Elon got a chance to pursue these ideas, it would either be a pretty rapid flop or utterly catastrophic. He continues. He says, this can be our Sputnik moment. Let me pause on that for a second. Vivek, remind me, who was it that did Sputnik? Because Sputnik was, as far as I know, the first man-made object in space. Well done, the Soviet Union. Oh, the Soviet Union? They still exist, surely. Grand, noble, durable nation, which definitely didn't kill over 60 million people as a result of exactly this kind of thinking, Elon. Vivek, it's the same thing. At this point. Yes, they got the first satellite in space. How many hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands had to starve to death specifically to fund that project? For the Apollo programs, the answer is pretty much zero, I expect. For Sputnik, it's somewhere in that range. She says no one had the staff to fund that project. They weren't getting food to begin with. Yeah, pretty much. The Soviet Union collapsed because it was built on premises established in rationality pattern thinking, which were just wrong. And they were attempts to change what was normal. That is exactly what you're doing here, Vivek. And it's harrowing that at the same time you are mentioning Sputnik as the emblem of the success that we're pursuing. If you want to turn America or anywhere else into the second Soviet Union, you do it on your own time. You do it with your own. You break your own toys. P.S. It's hard to estimate due to USSR being USSR, but a ballpark of a few million people starving seems about right. And specifically just to fund the Sputnik project. If you take the entire space projects of the USSR, I would say probably it would be over 1 million, yeah, maybe over several million. He continues, we've awakened from a slumber before and we can do it again. He says Trump's election hopefully marks the beginning of a new golden era in America. Well, that I agree with, but not if people like you are running it. He says, but only if our culture fully wakes up, a culture that once again prioritizes achievement over normalcy, excellence over mediocrity, nerdiness over conformity, hard work over laziness. What do you mean again? That has pretty much never been the way of the West. And given that, and the fact that the West has, even more so than today at various points in history, been dramatically better than every other culture on Earth, that no other society on Earth got beyond, shall we say, late medieval, before the West's influence started dragging them along with it as it was already industrial. What does that tell you, Vivek? Well, it tells you that you probably shouldn't with forces that were making civilizations work and strive and thrive long before you were born. He continues, that's the work we have cut out for us. Rather than wallowing in victimhood and just wishing or legislating alternative hiring practices into existence, that's what you're doing. He says, I'm confident we can do it. No, that is what you're doing, Vivek. A society which relies on foreign labor because it thinks it's too stupid is a society which is destroying itself from the inside out. If the US does not have the technical talent, then it's already doomed in the technical field. And India will just completely dominate it in technology, which of course it's already doing because all the technical talent's in India, right? Oh, wait. No, it's due to manipulation. Vivek, you, mate, just have to wait like maybe 6 months. And if Trump just pulls a few little strings, improve the market in the ways that he already did last time, obvious things that we would all expect, start deporting, reform the immigration system, a few simple things, you will start to see things change in a direction that just start melting this perspective. It's the same thing with the identitarian right people. They were desperate not to get Trump elected because they had a sense that he would actually fix things. And those kinds of people only thrive in an environment where so little hope exists that even their ideas sound reasonable. Oda says, Vance has era-defining politician written all over him. I wouldn't go that far, but he's good. He's a good choice. I wasn't sure at first, but he's a good choice. I believe he will be. I think it's already kind of decided, because Trump, you couldn't really not choose him, that he will be Trump's heir. And thus, I think it's very likely that he'll win in 2028. I'm looking forward to that. Maybe so, Oda, maybe so. But I haven't seen JD falling for this shit. So, Aiden is lovely. I've met her in person. Very nice person. But she strays a little bit in this direction. Nowhere near as much as Vivek here. But this is something I think Aiden and I, something that we sort of talk about a lot, because whilst I am perfectly capable of thinking in rational terms, it is in fact my natural state. I do something that I don't know of anyone else really that does. No one else comes to mind, which is that I rationally analyze what would otherwise only be approachable via common sense reasoning. And I think that sets me apart from a lot of other sort of academically minded or just high IQ analytical thinkers like Vivek. I didn't know how bad he was for it, but Aiden's a moderate example of that. But she has plenty of wisdom despite it. But Vivek's very bad for it. And I think because I'm capable of doing that, people like this are kind of my speciality. At least to the extent that they are smart enough to fight off almost any other kind of attack. If you were trying to out IQ him here, if you were trying to make an argument that he was wrong on the basis that, well, actually maths isn't all that important, or you trying to approach it from a different direction, it wouldn't be very effective. But undermining the very basis of his reasoning, as I can do here, a very different kind of approach. UFC says, when you follow Vivek's advice and battery farm Jeets to make code for the server. Thank you, but I have these things which apparently in the tech world Vivek does not recommend, which are called standards. So I wouldn't expect to spend that long on Vivek, but I think I've really worked him over.